Okay, so today I am joined by Bob Sorrentino. He is the voice behind the Italian Roots and Genealogy podcast and the author of the book Farmers and Nobles. So, welcome, Bob. I'm excited to have a sit down and have a conversation with you.
No, thanks a lot. Like I said, it's nice to be interviewed for a change instead of being the interviewer.
Right? You kind of just get back to sit back and let somebody else take control.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's nice. Yeah, you and I were talking before we hit record, and I don't do a whole lot of interviews. I do more of a narrative storytelling, and but that includes a lot of research. So it's nice to switch it up a little bit. When I get to do an interview, I'm like, whew, a little bit of a a little bit of a break. I don't have to research a whole lot. So, but yeah, thank you. Welcome. So, do you want to go ahead and tell our listeners about your podcast and blog?
Sure. Well, I started the blog, it's probably about 7 years ago now. And it was a lot of fun. I guess for about a year, I was kind of doing my research, telling my story, how I found, uh, both sets of grandparents. They were both born in Italy. And it was fun and interesting. And I had a lot to say about things. But then it got kind of a little bit boring. So I decided to do an audio podcast to get other people's stories because, most Italian Americans, we all have those similar stories, especially those of us who had grandparents that came, I guess, between like 1895 and 1915 or something like that. And it was great because the stories, while similar, a lot of them had a lot of differences. Some parents came and then some actually went back. And I
Hmm.
think and I think in my mother's family, I think they actually did intend to go back because they left my uncle there with his
Oh,
grandparents. And he didn't come over until with his family until 1950.
wow.
Um, because by the time he when they wanted him to come, uh he didn't want to leave because he felt that his grandparents were his only family.
True.
Yeah. And then, the war broke out. He wound up getting married and then he couldn't come because couldn't come as a child of his parents anymore. He had to
Yeah.
come, he had to come on his own. So when he got here, he actually went to Canada first. He had to spend 5 years in Canada. And but when he did come, he hadn't seen his parents in 35 years and had never met his brothers and sisters.
Oh my gosh. So a whole new country and family in a way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess since his siblings were all citizens, I guess it was easier, because they could help him find a place. So naturally, while they spoke Bari, they spoke English, so that helped. But it was growing up. It was fun with my uncle because he, like my grandparents, he had a very heavy Italian accent, and
Mm.
my aunt also, and my cousins, because that's where they were born.
Yeah, definitely. Well, especially him coming over that late. Did you say 1950?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's because a lot of that immigration slowed down completely at that point, or not completely, but pretty close.
Well, it was actually stopped in, I think it was 1923 or 1924. It was actually closed.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and even though uh his brothers all served in the army or navy during World War II, but that didn't give him any extra juice, if you know what I mean.
Right?
Um, and then so I was doing the audio podcast, and then I eventually graduated to the YouTube, which is fun because when I do the edits, I can actually show pictures of people and their families and where they come from and things like that. And uh, it's nice to have people on camera, I think.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yep. It adds another layer. I think it's the new upcoming thing is having the podcast on it's a video podcast, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly, exactly.
Yep.
So that was my mom's family, and so you mentioned the book is Farmers and Nobles, and the reason it's Farmers and Nobles, my mother's family, they were farmers from Torito Bari, and my great grandfather was I guess the town milkman. He had I thought he had one cow, but apparently he had two cows. And he would walk the streets with the cows. And if you wanted milk, he would milk the cow in front of your house.
Wow. That's pretty
Um,
cool.
but my father's family, uh, his father came from two. His parents were from lawyers and I guess sort of gentry in a way. And his grandfather eventually became a Supreme Court justice in Naples. But my grandmother's father and mother both came from two noble families, and
Wow.
one was more noble than the other. And what started everything was this card that I have behind me, which is my great grandfather's. I refer to it as a calling card. So it kind of has his name and a crest and all of that.
Yeah.
And and growing up, my mother would tell me that he was a duke or a count or something like that. So um, when I researched him, I Googled his name. The very first thing that popped up was it was on Angel Fire, but it was actually a copy of a page in the Libro d'Oro. And it showed him marrying a woman by the name of Emilia Caracciolo. And what's good about doing Italian research, the women, even now, they don't change their last names. So it does help.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I had never heard that name before, but everything matched up. My grandmother was born in 1883. They were married in 1882. His name was Nicola. My father's name was Nicholas, so naturally he was named after his grandfather. My oldest aunt was Amelia, and Nicola's wife was Amelia Caracciolo. And it was just this one kind of page that popped up. So I asked my cousin who lived with my grandmother, I said, "Do you know the name Caracciolo? Have you heard that?" And we used to call my grandmother Nanny. And she said, "Of course, that's Nanny's mother." I said, "Do you know how famous these people are? Do you know anything about them?" And she said, "Well, she used to say that there was a saint in the family and an admiral, and that her cousin was a princess. But we
Wow.
just thought she was, talking."
Sure.
Well, it turns out that her cousin was a princess because her grandfather was a prince. And through this Libra d'Oro, I trace my direct line back to the first Caracciolo in Naples in 950.
Wow. Holy
And,
smokes.
and I believe they're probably the oldest family on record in this book. And so they they intermarried with everyone across Italy naturally, because they were all city states back then, and there were all these power struggles and marriages of uh, for political reasons and all of that. But also because the Spanish were there for so long, when the Spanish came, the Spanish nobles didn't have anybody to marry.
Mm,
So they married Italian noblewomen.
okay.
So as a result, I'm related to French, Spanish, English, German, Polish, Portuguese kings and queens going back centuries. And
No doubt.
it's like, I never expected to find anything like that.
That's amazing. And so that's what your book goes over is kind of that dichotomy of the farmers and the nobles for your family lineage, right?
Yeah, kind of starts with a little bit about research and me talking to other people and getting some really wild stories from them, because I truly believe that nothing happens by accident. When people find their family generations past in Italy, it's not an accident, that there's
Mhm.
some force. And there are stories that back that up. And then I talk about my aunts and uncles in America and growing up with them, and how my mother's family, especially, she had there were nine in her family. So I always like to say I had nine sets of parents,
Yeah.
because well, they were loving and great to us, but if you got out of line, you got a smack in the back of the head. uh, and then I go into the noble side with some of the documents that I found, proving it. And everything that I did, I was able to verify with both the genealogist in America and the genealogist in Italy, who kind of helped me find something, but then also cousins. And one cousin that I found, there's a fourth cousin who's Pio Malo, and actually we're related on both sides. She confirmed much of what I thought was true because she's there and she knew the family, much more. And when we went there, it was just really, really cool going to these places. The Pio Malo family, for example, at one point, according to my cousin Cinzia, they owned at least 7 homes throughout Naples and southern Italy.
Wow. How I bet it was amazing going back there.
Yeah, I mean it's really cool going both places. When people ask about, going to Italy, I always say to them, you going to the hometown, and some say, yeah, I can't wait to go there. And some say, well, I don't know anyone. And I say, yeah, even if you don't, if when you're in the hometown, you have a different feeling.
Yeah.
But we went to 3 of the places on our first trip. We went to Capocota, which is in Molise, which is where the Pio Malo, actually, no, they Nicola's grandmother was the Duchess of Capricota, and her name was Capici Piccicelli. And she was the Duchess in Molise. His great grandfather was the Count of Montebello in Calabria. And the Caracciolo side, they were princes of Tocciarolo, and then also the princes of Avellino. And going back 8 or 9 generations, they pretty much own much of current day Campania. That's how wealthy and rich these people were.
Oh, I
And so
bet.
and so they treated me like I was the prince, which would
That's pretty cool.
and they do that even if you're not a prince, by the way. Even when you go to the small towns, they do the same thing. But I asked at one point, I said, why are they treating me like this? I'm just this guy from America. And they said, no, you don't understand. We don't forget. And the lineages here are very, very important.
That's so
And
neat.
and the nobles, you know, in the 14th, 15th, 16th, up until unification, they were the whole social structure, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So through writing your book and your genealogy research on your family, what is one story or event, something that surprised you or shocked you? I mean, obviously the whole noble part, but was there anything that stood out to you?
Um, well, I think the funniest story is my wife and I were watching the series The Borgias. I don't know if you saw that or not, but it's a really great series, especially
What
the
is it?
Showtime one. The Borgias.
Oh, okay.
It's about Pope Alexander, and they were as they were introducing the characters and everything. They were introducing my grandparents.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
so I said to my wife, I said, that's a grandfather and that's a grandmother and that's a grandfather. And what's really interesting about it was that Pope Alexander, his, uh, I guess his main girlfriend, um, was a woman by the name of Julia Farnese, and her brother was Alessandro, who is one of my great grandfathers, who eventually became Pope Paul III. And he became a cardinal at the age of 18
Wow.
because Pope Alexander was afraid they were going to kick him out of being Pope. And so he needed allies. So he went around just making, everybody that he knew would be on his side cardinals so they could vote to keep him in. The other prominent people in this series is the King of Naples, Ferrante, who was a pretty nutsy guy. Uh, and then also there's there's a family called Gonzaga, and Francesco Gonzaga married Lucretia Borgia. Um, no, I'm sorry, Francesco d'Este. He married Lucretia Borgia, and his brother-in-law, who married Isabel d'Este, had an affair with Lucretia Borgia. So there's this whole web there, and as I'm watching it, I'm like just amazed. And what's really sad, I think, for the Italian culture is we know we see all these movies about the kings and queens of England and Spain and you know France, but nothing, very little about the Italians.
That's
Um,
true.
yeah, it's sad.
I don't even actually, now that you say that, I don't even, like when I think of England, I think king, queen. I don't even associate that with Italy. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and the fact is, going back through all of these marriages, I actually descend from some of these kings and queens because Europe, everybody was marrying everybody to do that power struggle kind of thing and uh keep their hold on things. Uh, but yeah, there's so many interesting characters, and when you go to Italy, like this last trip we just took, we went to the Este castle in Ferrara, and it's really really well preserved, and it's a really really cool place, and nobody goes there because they don't know about it. I mean,
Yeah,
we were probably the only Americans there.
that's crazy. And what is this place called again?
It's called Estense Castello. It was the home of the Este family going back to like 1540 or something like that.
Wow.
Uh, and it's Ferraris, there's no tourists there. So, and those are the best places to go where there's no tourists.
For sure. Yeah, my husband and I are planning a trip next summer, and it'll be our first time. And so, we're gonna spend like a day or two doing the Rome, all that kind of stuff. You know, want to see the Colosseum, David, all that kind of stuff. Then we're headed south. Because I mean, I've never been there, but I know I just want to head south.
Well, yeah, and what's nice about this, we went to the north for the first time, just last month, and it was nice, but there's a lot of tourists there.
Mhm.
The architecture and things, the food is different. Um, but when you're in places like Florence and Venice and Milan and Rome, they're big cities. When you get to the south and you go into some of these uh, smaller towns, that's where you kind of really feel Italian when they're there.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to our ultimate destination is the Basilicata region. My family is from there, Potenza. So we're gonna go pretty far south.
Yeah, well, Matera is one of the coolest places we've been.
Yeah,
We,
it's only like 40 miles, 60 miles, something like that from Potenza. So I think we're gonna stay in Matera. I don't know. We haven't decided all of this, but Matera, I can't wait to go there.
Yeah, yeah, and it was funny because we had a guide and he was explaining. He said, "Did you see that? I forget which James Bond movie it was, but there's a James Bond movie, one of the more recent ones, where they're driving like through these winding streets with all these and that was filmed in Matera.
Yeah, I heard about that. I haven't seen it either, but that's pretty cool.
And up until like 1960, people were still living in caves.
Yeah, for like 10,000 years or something like that.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, one of the oldest cities. So, yeah. But you've got to know that genealogy. You got to do that research to know where to go for your family village, your family region, that kind of stuff. So,
And that's why I kind of say that to people too. Even if you don't know the exact town, if you know you're from Calabria, if you know you're from Sicily or something like that, it's still worth going there
hmm
to see because when you go up like Matera, for example, the main city is up high, but then when you go down into where the caves are, you have to think about how people went from there to like Naples to get on a boat to
yeah,
come over here. And a lot of times the men came first. So
Yep.
the women would come with 2 or 3 children and take this donkey ride, from who knows how many days to get to a port, not knowing what to expect on the other side.
Oh, for sure. I ran across with my podcast, I do a lot of research through the newspaper databases, and I ran across just this really small blimp of an article. I couldn't find anything more out of it, but it talked about this woman who just came over from Italy to her with her 2 children to meet up with her husband in Leadville, Colorado. Well, Leadville, Colorado is 10,000 feet up in the mountains. So it is snow. You can't even get up there sometimes. The pass is closed and everything. And so, like you were just saying, she has no idea what she's walking into. And they had to send her down on this. I guess you could call it a gondola. I'm sure it's not the kind of gondolas we think of today. And it was freezing. And so she put her 2 sons under her dress because, they wore the very big dresses. Because they weren't prepared for the cold. She had no idea. It's crazy to think about what our ancestors went through. I mean, just going in blindly, but ready to go.
Yeah, yeah, and there, we look at it now. We go there and we say, "Boy, this is so beautiful. Why did they leave?" But there was no farming, there was no industry, there was no real business, and typically they would have somebody who made the trip first,
Hmm.
and they'd be, they have a sponsor or something like that, and they would band together to do stuff. So we've certainly come a long way.
We have. Yep, we have them to thank for it.
No, exactly. And that's what I'm sure that's why you do what you do, but that's why I do this because um I don't want the next generations to kind of forget,
Yeah.
or not know where they came from because it's really part of you. And I interviewed somebody and we don't think about it, but she was really good in explaining because she does all this DNA stuff. And when we think about DNA, we think about physical characteristics. But she explained, she said, we also get our, mental characteristics from them.
Hmm.
So she says, when you think about why, you know, why, why are some people, why don't they like to spend a lot of money, for example? Or why are they afraid of the water? Or why are they afraid of fire or something like that? She said, it's very possible that something happened to somebody before, and that sticks in the DNA. Hard to prove, I guess, but it is an interesting
Sure.
concept. You know?
I've heard that concept be called blood memory. Have you heard of that?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, kind of the same concept. It's in our blood. It's in our DNA.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And she actually, she talks about how she, helps people um, get over that. She
Hmm.
said, she she's not a big believer in psychiatrists, so she kind of says they don't understand. They don't understand. You have to figure out not what happened to you per se, but there's something that may have happened to somebody else in the past.
Yep.
Uh, and she gave a couple of examples about that. But like I was saying before, I've heard so many stories from people about things that just can't be a coincidence when they sought out their ancestors. One person was trying to find a place to stay. She was up north and she was looking in this very, very small town and she just was down to 2 places and just did like eeny, meeny, miny, mo and picked one. And she called and the person said, why are you coming here? There's nothing here. And she said, well, my family's from there. She said, oh, who's your family? She gave the name. The place that she picked to stay was willed to the people who owned it by her aunt or great aunt or something like that.
Wow.
Uh, the most amazing one that I heard, some of these are in the book. The most amazing one that I heard was the person who did my research for me, Alessandro. He had a client, and I don't remember what town they were in, but they were walking through the town, and this old woman came up to them and said, "Who are you?" And his client didn't speak any English, but Alessandro said, "Oh, he's looking for his family and all of that." And she said, "Come with me." And he said she walked up to this small little chapel kind of thing, which they had all over the place. She took a key out of her dress and opened up the door to this chapel. And it was Santa Lucia, who was the patron saint of eyes. And he said, when we went in there, they had all of these gifts that people sent from all around the world to kind of pay tribute. Originally, it was supposed to be to pay for the chapel or something, but they left everything there to kind of pay tribute. And his client went over and picked up, they said, "You're supposed to pick something up and put it towards your eyes to bless your eyes." So he picked something up and he put it towards his eyes and he said, "I don't believe this." And Alessandro said, "What?" And he said, "This was sent by my great grandparents."
Oh
And it
my
had their
God.
names in there because people would put their names in.
Yeah. That's the kind of thing that you'd watch in a movie or read in a book and think, oh, yeah, that's definitely fiction. Like,
Yeah.
it blows me away. Oh my gosh. And
And,
those,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, those are the kind of stories that, like you said, it gives you chills.
Yeah, and other people just walk up, they see somebody that looks like them or something. They say, or they'll say, or "Who are you?" And they'll give the name and say, "Oh, I'm that too," or "Oh, they live down the block," or something like that. I'll tell you one more really cool one too. I interviewed somebody who he went with friends, and he asked his friend, "Where's your family from?" And he gave the name of the town, and it wasn't that far away. He said, "Well, let's go. He wasn't the other guy wasn't really there to look for his family, and his name was um, Napolitani or Napolitano, something like that, and there's a million of them in Italy, right? And he said they were just walking around knocking on doors. If they saw the name, they would knock on a door. And somebody would say, "Oh, no, no, we think we have relatives in New York or and Connecticut, but no, that's not us." And so on the way out, his cousin said, um, "Before we leave, you have to stop. We have to stop at the fountain because the water comes right from the mountains, and it's the best water you're ever going to taste, and it's really cold and all that." So they were drinking water, and a garbage truck pulls up, and same thing. Who are you? Uh, so they said, "We're so and so, and he's from Connecticut, and his last name is Napolitani, and um, we're trying to find his family, but we couldn't find anybody." The garbage man said, "Follow us." They took him to the town. They took him to the house with his relatives.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
Like I said, if you saw the movie, you go, "Ah, that
Yeah,
can't be true."
exactly. And how crazy it's like they're on their last thing. Let's just stop by the water fountain and then boom, it happens.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why I really believe that you know they want to be found in some way, shape, or form.
I
That
agree.
you know.
Even through my own family research, my great grandparents, I didn't have a picture of them. And just doing genealogical research, I finally found, and for me, a photo is everything. And I finally found a photo, and I think you're right. I think they're out there waiting. Even, my podcast. I started my podcast because I've always been into genealogy and researching my family. And I would go onto newspaper databases and type in my family's last name, but then I'd run across an article about an Italian American that I'm not related to. But I was like, oh, that's really cool. I'm going to keep that. And then eventually I had a ton of articles of Italian Americans that I'm not related to. And I was like, what am I going to do with these? And, like, I was like, well, I could tell their story. And that's how my podcast got started. So,
Oh,
even
that's
those
cool.
people.
Well, that's like Kate Kelly, who's she's she's known as the photo angel. She goes to all of these antique stores and flea markets and things, and she buys photos,
Mm.
old photos, and then she hunts for their family,
Oh,
and
cool.
and she finds them.
Nice. Oh, that's amazing. It always breaks my heart when I go in and I see family photos in an antique store. I'm like, oh, nobody wanted these.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know how many she's returned now. But I had her on the show. She's really a great guy. So she's really, really nice. And you know, she's become like I think world famous now doing
That is
it.
so cool. Yeah, no doubt. So I'm a cemetery girl. I know that sounds kind of weird, but I love going to cemeteries. Is that something that you would recommend going, going to Italy, wanting to go back to your family's village? Because I'm pretty excited to do that.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, we went when we were in my paternal grandmother's hometown. We went there because my cousin took us there and showed us where my great grandfather was buried and all of that. And, and Nicole is interesting because he's my dad's half first cousin, but he's younger than I am because my great grandfather, when my great grandmother died, she was only 42. He
Mm.
was 60, he married a woman 30 and had another family. So he's married with his two daughters from his second wife and his second wife. But yeah, no, it is cool going through there. I would say I haven't been there in years, but the cemetery, my family's from Corona, Queens, and the cemetery in Flushing where everybody's buried. You walk through that cemetery as a kid from Corona, and you see everybody that you ever met all over the
Yep.
place. But it's
Recognize
like,
the,
yeah, but it's like that in Italy too, because they know where everybody is, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure you can just recognize the names. I had somebody, I interviewed Louis Bruno. He wrote a book and he went back and visited his family and it was the same thing. He was like looking at the tombstones and he's like, I know that name. I know that name. And, because it's from the villages, they all went kind of to the same place. Like for my family, Potenza, a lot of them went to Denver and, so those names are still prominent there.
Well, yeah, and a lot of things that people don't do is, like on Facebook, for example, look for Facebook groups with the hometown
Mm,
because there are a lot of them out there.
yeah.
And a lot of people have found their family through Facebook.
See, that's pretty cool. I mean, what a great resource. And social media, for all of its downfalls, can be extremely helpful.
Yeah, and my group, for example, they'll help people translate or do things. But I know several people, they have groups for their hometowns. They've either started it or they've become members of it. And they've met, cousins in Italy, they've met cousins here. So it is a cool resource to do. And
Definitely.
people are very helpful.
Oh, yeah, they want to help. Yep.
Yeah. So you've done DNA, yeah?
Yes.
You
Yep, I've
find
done
anything
that.
weird?
Not anything too surprising. It even got back to the regions for me. So I thought that was really cool because, it can say, oh yeah, you've got whatever percentage of Italian, but to even go back to those regions, it's really neat. My aunt, she did a DNA test as well. And so my great great grandfather, he came from Potenza, but he married a woman from Salerno. And so my aunt, she connected to both of those regions. So I thought that was kind of neat. But it is nice, even on Ancestry, you can search by town for DNA matches and stuff. And that can be really helpful too.
Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, people in Italy don't do DNA testing.
Mm.
I thought about bringing some test kits with me, but I didn't. I didn't know if they would be offended or anything like that. So, you know, uh,
Let's go around swabbing everybody's cheeks.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, but yeah, people ask me, like what's the best site to use, and I say, well, if you want to find cousins, it's Ancestry, although they're getting very, very pricey these days. I said, but if you want to just research your family, do familysearch.org because
Hmm.
it's free.
Yep.
And they have, just as much information, some cases maybe more. So, that's my advice to people is if you're not worried about finding cousins or DNA, then just do family search, or at least or start with family search because it's free.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
then go from
Absolutely.
there. Then
Yeah.
go from there.
And there's if you're wanting to trace back to Italy, this is kind of hard, but there's even free newspaper databases. So like in Colorado, we have the Colorado Historic Newspaper Database, which is free. You can donate if you want, but even sometimes that can help you as well. Like if you know a relative that's maybe settled, like for my example, like in Denver, but there's an article talking about where they came from that can help as well. So,
Well, yeah, and I found information on my grandmother's and grandfather's parents in a New Jersey newspaper from the 1920s because
yeah.
they had an obituary in there.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Yeah, obituaries, death notices, marriages, that kind of stuff can be really helpful. Unfortunately, some of the other databases, they can get a little pricey too for
Yeah, yeah.
newspapers.
Yeah, I try if I whenever I see once in a while newspapers.com or whatever. If sometimes they'll have the free 2 weeks or something like that.
Hmm.
So I'll jump on there and I'll I'll, I'll,
Yep.
I'll try and get as much done as I possibly can on that free trial thing.
Right. I think there's well, there used to be, I don't know if there is. There was an Ancestry package, like a membership that you could have where it included the newspapers.com, but they have gotten a little pricey.
Yeah, and even now, even if you just want to preserve your tree, they charge you, I think, $5 a month. It used to be free.
Yeah, that used to be
So
the free portion.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we've talked about some resources. What are some roadblocks that listeners could possibly run into if they're wanting to research their ancestry back to Italy?
Yeah, I think for the biggest roadblock I think is trying to get back further than like 1809 when the civil records came into play.
Hmm.
Um, some people have been very lucky. They've gone there and their town, the church in the town, the priest, the pastor priest may be very open and forthcoming and allow people to look at the record books. A lot of them won't. Um, it's also, if you do go or if you plan to go and you want to go to the Comune, make sure before you go, check what hours they're open because
Mm,
some of them are only open 1 day a week or 2 days a week, and some may be open to 2 to 4. And it's the same thing, if you get the right person, you do good.
yeah.
I my biggest roadblock was with my father's family, the Sorrentino family. I could not find anything on them. Um, they were in Naples. I found that I had gotten bad information on where my grandfather had come from. Originally, I was told Caserta, and then somebody else told me another town, I forget. But he actually was born in Pagani, which is near Salerno or in Salerno. But uh, try to ask as many old people in the family as you can where people came from. Um, but my Sorrentino roadblock, I couldn't find anything. So I eventually hired somebody over there to find it, and he was able to find a lot of information. The smaller towns are easier because if they've been filmed by Family Search, there's a lot of the records will be there because they're small towns. Big places like Naples and Bari itself, and some of the towns up north, it's you have to be lucky. Sometimes you may find it. And the northern part of Italy, they didn't start keeping records until I think around 1861 or 1862 after
Wow.
unification, because um, the South, when Napoleon is the one who actually instituted the civil records. Um,
Oh, that's neat.
and yeah, and he didn't conquer the North like he did the South. They kind of came later, so they didn't have to fall under that. Um, so, but that's yeah, it's if you're serious about it and you're really really stuck, hire somebody over there to check it out for you. They're not that expensive, you know.
Yeah. No, I think that's great because they know the area, they know where to go, the language barrier is not there, so that makes sense.
And the other thing, a lot of people don't know this is FamilySearch.org does a free consultation. They do a
Oh,
30-minute consultation. They have there's a tab out there someplace. and I forget what it's called, but you can contact them to do a free consultation, and you send them what you know. And if they, well, even I think even if they don't find anything, they'll get back to you and say, this is, this is what we found. So if stuck, it's worth giving them a shot too. They found
Absolutely.
something, they found this will. It wasn't the will itself. Somebody was contesting it going back to like 1754 or 1774 or something like that. This big long document that they were able to find. So yeah, they're a really good resource. And you could do, I know you could do, I don't know if you could do as many as you want, but you could do more than one if you're stuck.
Cool. Oh, that's nice. And Family Search, they've really amped up their photos and like where people can put their personal memories, photos of their ancestors and stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah, yeah. I interviewed several people from there, but I actually interviewed the person. I don't know if he's still there. His name is Joel Cole, and he's got this really thick Italian accent. You wouldn't believe it. And he at the time, he was the person who was kind of in charge of doing all the filming and all of that kind of stuff. So I got a lot of insight. And they plan on doing everything.
Nice.
The hardest part for them is the indexing,
Yeah.
because they rely on volunteers to do the indexing.
Yep. Yeah. So if you're into this, go volunteer. It's not too hard. I've done it a couple of times. It's not
Yeah, I've
bad.
done it. I've done it a couple of times too. I've done it a couple
Yeah.
of times. My
Yeah.
problem is all my Italian records are done by the guy who writes like me, and you can't read it.
I always thought it would be amazing to have an archive job where you're filming and going through those records. I'm not sure how good I would be at it because I'd probably stop and read it all and but what a fascinating job. Oh my gosh.
Make friend if you find your talent on like Facebook or something, try to make friends with somebody who's can get you into the commune. It makes the life a lot easier.
Good advice. Good advice. I like it. So you've got the podcast, you got the book. Any other new projects in the future?
Well, I'm working on something now. We're about two-thirds of the way through. Myself and Joe Tucciarone, who wrote the book, co-authored the book, Italian Swindle to New York, and Michael Cavalieri, he's working on this third documentary in Sicily. We're working on a project to tell the story of the first wave of immigrants. So those who came in the 1860s through the 1880s and were victims of the Padrones and all of that.
Hmm.
And through like World War II, because, up until, well, up until after World War II, Italians weren't treated very nice for the most part. And they kind of got recognized mostly after World War II, because I think it was some 5 million or something like that had enlisted in the Army and Navy and that. So we want to tell the story from our perspective, and the bad parts, but then also the happy ending kind of thing.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. I've ran across newspaper articles about that whole event and situation, and there's a lot out there to dive through.
Well, yeah, and Joe is, I mean, nobody knows who Joe is, but if you want to read a really, really good book, it's Italian Swindle to New York. And he's like the predominant expert on this stuff. And one of the things that we discovered, which I had never even heard of, was the Italian children were brought over first, and
Hmm.
they were taught how to play violins and harps and put on the streets of New York.
Oh, wow.
And they lived a very, very sad life, a tragic life. People don't know about that. And they kind of touch on it a little bit in the Cabrini movie, but they don't they don't really explain how it happened, how these kids got here and were left on their
Yeah.
own for the most part. Um, and the other I think more than anything, I think since I've been doing this, coming from New York, we think all Italians just settled in New York, We kind of give a little bit of credit to New Orleans for having some Sicilians there, but my eyes have opened up to find out that Italians went all over the country from 1860 through, the 1920s,
They
and
did.
did mining and built railroads and, everything that you could think of.
Yeah. I've done stories of Alaska. I mean, I'm trying to hit every state with my podcast and my stories, but yeah, they are far and wide everywhere. I did an interview yesterday with Mariana Gatto, and she talked about how if there was a need for cheap labor in a place, generally Italians were there, like a lot of other ethnicities. So,
Well, yeah, and one of the stories that Joe has in his book, because the Italians were basically dumped in New York. They were supposed to go to South America, and they left them there. They didn't know what to do with them, so they left them on Roosevelt Island. You probably don't know where that is, but it's kind of in the East River between Manhattan and Queens. And there was a giant snowstorm one year. I forget what year. They had nobody clean the streets, so they grabbed all the Italians to shovel the streets of New York, and that kind of spurred the rest of the country to recognize that at least, hey, these guys are hard workers. But they in some cases they went out to places and they didn't know that they were union busters or something like that. They were just told you're going to work,
yeah,
and so in some cases they got beat up because of that. They were just trying to work, and they didn't
yeah,
they didn't know what was going on.
yeah. They were just doing a job, is what they believed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a fascinating project, and you're about halfway through with it, you said?
Probably about two-thirds,
Oh,
two-thirds.
nice.
So
Okay. All right. Well, that
trying
sounds
to try
fascinating.
try trying to write a book and trying to do a movie are like probably the two of the most difficult things I've ever tried to do.
Yeah, it's a lot. Even just running a podcast is a lot. It's time consuming, editing and I'm not, I have my recording equipment, but thank goodness for YouTube. It taught me a lot.
Yeah. I've found some pretty good tools. I started using Riverside.fm now,
Okay.
uh, because they're cool because they'll do the whole edit for you,
Oh, nice.
and they even do clips.
Oh, cool.
So when I interview you, we're going to do Riverside, so you'll get to see how. And not only that, what it does is it records locally.
Oh,
So the video is usually a lot better. It enhances the sound with just a click of a button. So it's
okay.
really a neat tool.
I might have to try that out. That's pretty cool.
They give you show notes. They give you
Wow.
all kinds of stuff.
Especially, I like the little clips. Those sometimes are hard to generate. So that's pretty neat. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
I'm
It's
look
Riverside.fm.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, where can the listeners find you and buy your book and look at your blog and all of that kind of stuff or
Yeah.
podcast?
So the book is pretty easy. Just go to Amazon. It's Farmers and Nobles. And the YouTube channel is Italian Roots and Genealogy. That's the Facebook group. The podcast is Italian Roots and Genealogy also, and it's on, every platform if you just want to hear the audio podcast.
Okay. But you have it on YouTube as well, so people can
Yeah, same name, Italian Roots and Genealogy.
in genealogy. Perfect. All right. Well, I'll put all of that in the show notes for our listeners so that they can find you and reach out to you. And the Facebook, I'm going to join it. I think that's amazing. So if you are looking to research your family, I think that's a great place to start is your Facebook page.
Absolutely, because like I said, there's 13,000 people on there now, so you'll probably find a relative. If you don't, you'll find somebody that'll help for sure.
Help you out. Perfect. All right, Bob. Well, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. It was so nice to meet you and have a conversation and find out all about you and all the great work you're doing.
Oh, thanks. It was my pleasure. And looking forward to doing this again in September.
In September, I am too. All right. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks.